Let's paint this chateau on a moving train. You can screenshot this if you want to join me. Everything is sped up here, but this is a gesture drawing, which you know I love to do to begin with. So we just get an idea of the perspective of where the castle is going to be on the page, where the sky is going to be, just a little scribble. Then to settle the mind again, and because I'm self-conscious on this train, which is moving, everything's moving, I then would encourage you to do the same. Use your pencil nice and light so that you can get another little gesture drawing. It just settles the brain. So I didn't have a palette. I used my sketchbook to mix the first green. You know I like you to mix several shades of green. So I make a lighter green, I make a darker green. This brush was immediately absolutely awful. It was one that I used for a kids' workshop. You see I added a little bit of red to that green so that it would take that tanginess off it, you know. The only problem was this brush was so bad, it held on to all the paint, the bristles were gone. So I just decided to start painting, adding water so that I wouldn't get that real gristly finish. And I know that you have to look at the page for this, but basically where the original was, it was, there was trees behind me when I took a photo of the chateau. So I'm really just planting down light and shade at this stage and getting a real feel of how it is. When you're doing anything with grass in the foreground, look at the darkest bits, which you'll see here. I actually add black and red to my green to make it very strong before adding in blue so that you get a real deep earthy depth. So when you're looking at anything, you want to look at what far away is really dark and where that shadow is. As you can see, I've started planting down. This is also on 1.5 speed, so no matter how fast I talk, that brush is going to move really fast. But with this, I started from the ground up. So if you're thinking about when you paint as well, you want to think about, do I start at the top, do I start at the bottom, or do I start in the center? Where is it I want my time and energy to be? For me, I started with the green here, but I wish I'd started with sky because this brush was so awful. And I had one tissue that I couldn't actually, I couldn't get it cleaned at all. Then I realized another problem was I'd brought Persian blue rather than ultramarine blue. So I'm immediately like annoyed about that because it's more the color of the table than it is of the sky. And you know me, I'm happy to make a sky any color, but the problem with that Persian blue, and because it was the professional quality, it's so dense that it really does take over everything. So you can see here, I'm just trying to make a few versions of it, and my camera is moving. This brush is awful, so I allow the paint to be quite thick on my brush. I take the lighter shade underneath and I start to frame around where the top of the trees around the castle are. And the girl across from me was a wee bit grumpy, so I was just so self-conscious, and that's the only thing I can say here. But I was really determined to make this painting. So I quite like the way this turned out, in that there's obviously that dark in the very top right, and then we just have these varying shades of it, even though it's a very bright blue day. Just remember, when you take a photo, there will be that kind of haze around where the edge of the lens will be, so it'll always be a bit darker in the corners. So now I'm moving on to making shades for the castle, and the blue has stuck to my brush, so I'm really trying desperately to roll it off. The bristles are awful, and I'm not fussy about things, but I just was like, this is the last time I ever bring a rubbish brush. So I take some of this color and I try to just plant it on, but all I'm thinking about is how green it is, so I add in the water. And then when I'm looking at the castle or the chateau, I'm just looking at light and shade here as well. So planting down so we get a real base. There's the roof as well, so that's why I'm leaving the little white bits at the top. I put white straight on there as well because I just couldn't get this Persian blue out of my brush. It was just driving me mad. So these are actually little trees on the left and the right that I used that same colour into because I wanted there to be a wee bit of a language so it didn't feel all bitsy. And now I'm going for grey, but the colour of the castle is still on there. and I couldn't get it so it was a really dark grey either. So you'll see here that I hesitate a little bit, but I decided just fill it in, Ali, just fill it in. So we are going now for a slightly darker shade of it, and just keep looking at the subject matter. If you take a screenshot of the castle at the start, or if you're working with a building on a landscape, just keep looking at the shape, because ultimately, as I always teach you, this is through the artist's eyes. So this doesn't need to look perfect like a picture. It just needs, and for me, it's going to my friend whose birthday it was that we were celebrating. So I then start to tap in where the little windows are, but this blooming brush drives me mad again because it just, oh, it's so thick. It's too thick. It could be beautiful. And actually, if I had have had a small brush for like a lip liner, I would have used that, only I lost a bag on the way over. So it had all my makeup brushes in it. Anyway, now we go on for we're mixing a really, really dark shade, but you can see there that the cloudiness of, that this is me trying to make a really dark green. I did make a dark green. But that the white from the castle continues to stay on there a little bit. But what this does do is really starts to plant, pushing those dark colours back, which I was happy with. Going over where the trees are there as well, and then there's a little bit of foliage in front of the castle. Here, just mixing another shade of green and losing the will with that blue shade, just rolling the paint off the brush. I've actually got a little bit of white in this one, so it changes the shade again, and I bring it down onto the foreground. And this is a nice way to add in light back over where you started with it again, so you bring it up the layer up a little bit. And now we are filling in more of the foliage as well. I just didn't want it to look like it was paint by numbers, so I decided to add in a little bit of pink. It wasn't entirely meant to be this colour. It is actually more meant to be brown, but I wanted to do that so that there was a real lift in it. So I added it to the green, and then we had this other shade of it, which was nice. So look, I'm just dotting it round so it feels a bit more spring-like. You will see here that green is just never enough for me. That's why I keep mixing it. So this is for the little wall at the front of the chateau, and also for more of the foliage around it. Not the complete colour, but it's another version. You can see me just frantically rolling off the paint off the brush. And now what I'm mixing is an orange in the bottom right corner, and that's for the little wall, which is just in front of the... There was a plant which was beautiful, and it was more of this really rich colour, and then I tried to make a version of the lighter one, because what's happening here when you're doing plein air painting, or you're painting with no palette, with no variation of brushes, and there's people around you, you don't know them, your French is also limited, and everybody just wants to get to their destination. It's not a relaxed environment, and I think that comes through with the painting that I made, as well as those edgy, awful edges of the brush. However, for me, it was really important to paint, and I wanted to do more for you, but there was something that happened when we were away, so I didn't get to paint as much as I thought, and then when I realized the brush was rubbish. So there's the little wall I was talking about. So that's a little wall at the front, which is like a peachy shade, and then has a few little lighter bits on it. So that's me mixing and mixing and mixing. And it comes along the front. I actually loved walking out that little archway when we were there. You'll see by this stage then we have the foreground, we have the sky, and it's really just, look, the brush actually came apart there. So the sky is then, this is me now making, as with everything, we look at shapes and we look at light and shade. So the castle for me was not defined enough, and that was me giving it as, look, I just keep getting so disheartened with this brush that is like hanging on by a thread. But I've also just given into it and was like, do you know what? but whatever I can get on here is still going to be this lovely little moment in time. It's a chateau buried in this ground, this land. And then what I'm doing now is just filling in where the windows would be. So this is with my almost completely black, just where the door is, and then little bits of the roof and the windows where they could be really dark. And it really starts to come together. And it's fun, and I'm going to frame it and give it to my friends. So I'm very much on to the very dark now, which is what you'll find when you're working with shadows of trees. I would make as many shades of green as I can and as dark as I can before I would go straight for the black, but certainly bring black into whatever you're doing. And then here is everything becomes a little bit, the water's dirty because I'm just using the end of my water bottle poured onto the lid. So it's just really fun to be resourceful and to see that painting can happen anywhere. Here you are, and that's the last little bits, which sends those back. So there we go. Then I can't help myself. I bring a pencil into, so I start with a pencil, I finish with a pencil. This is just a lovely way to add energy to what is already on the page and to shape everything. So it brings perspective to that which has been lost with the thick brush. Sometimes I leave it. Other times I like this. There I'm just doing that little wall at the front, the little archway, leaning into it quite heavy. So some bits really are standing out, and it's also for the trees. You can add in a little bit of the trees. And I don't even know if I signed it. I think I did. But that is how we paint on a moving train. And I want you to just paint wherever you see fit and trust yourself and the process.